she was trying to burn some fat. And so the way we liked to do it back then was we would lower the calories a little bit and we would increase the volume on the salads to give us that satiety. And she was waking up in the middle of the night to vomit. Like she was feeling like crap, and it wasn't like just some bad lettuce that she had one day. It was a different. And so she said, it wasn't even me who said, try this. She said, you know what? When we landed in Puerto Rico, she had listened to one or two things, and she said, I'm just gonna try not eating any vegetables this weekend. So I'm just gonna eat meat. And she lost like 3 pounds, which, you know, for a woman, that's a lot. And she felt amazing. And so now we know more, because it may not be the vegetables that are these evil things that are hurting her. It's that she had a sensitivity to lettuce. So, and that was one of the many things she was sensitive to. But for her, she sees it in a way like, I don't need to do guesswork when I just eat meat. You know, the worst thing that could happen is my meat was cooked in vegetable oils and I feel like crap, or the seasoning had onion because she's sensitive to onion. And some of the things, well, by the way, onions in everything. So I love it so much. And it's hard for me because when I'm marinating our meat, I have to do it. I have to make our marinades because every seasoning has onion. But she felt the best she's ever felt with, you know, meat. And now in the past year, we continue to grow. We continue to try to improve and enhance, and, you know, more power to you if you found like the Michaela Petersons who've finally found it. A lot of that is in the beginning, and then what happens over time. And so we have to look at what happens over time. And so if you continue to search for the right thing, I think that what worked for me a few years ago may not work for me a few years from now.
Welcome back to another show brought to you by our friends over at Joovv.com. As you know by now, they are the leaders in photobiomodulation, which is a big fancy way of talking about how light affects our biology. And if you're physically active, if you're recovering from an injury, or just want to enhance your lifestyle, I highly recommend Joovv. Why? Because I've tested this with my hormone levels, I've tested it with my wife. This is part of our lifestyle, and many of the people that we interview on this channel, including Danny Vega, believe in photobiomodulation and use this as part of their lifestyle. So friends, you can support your body's physiology and our podcast and your own health by going to joovv.com/Mike. You can learn more about photobiomodulation. You can learn more about the devices that we use. We just got the new Joovv Elite, which is awesome, but they also make a travel unit that you can bring with you on the go. And if you're skeptical, like I was when I first learned about this, I would suggest starting there, because the Joovv Go is powerful enough. And if you're ever doing work on your computer at night, you can use this to kind of help mitigate some of that blue light exposure. So friends, you can again check out that URL at joovv.com/Mike. And let's cut back to it and talk about carnivore, training and exercise and carb cycling with Danny Vega.
I'm so proud of you homeschooling your kids.
Oh, I appreciate it, man.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, don't get me started down that rabbit hole, because we'll talk about it the whole time.
45 minutes.
Yep.
It's really needed. John Lemansky, a mutual friend of ours.
Good friend of mine. Yeah. And he's out in Puerto Rico now.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Really cool.
He's actually, he's going to join us for a trip. You know, I just went hunting, and we wanted to do another trip with a few really, what we consider just awesome human beings. And it would be John, myself, Ben, Robert, you know, Keto Savage, and Anthony J, who's just an amazing human being. So yeah, he's an awesome person, man. And he and his wife are very much on the same page with us when it comes to like why we homeschool, and more than just, you know, trying to do this stuff at home, but more than just giving the kids just room to live their lives, you know, because we find that the more you just let go, the more that they can just be their authentic selves, and they can just keep their curiosity and keep their love of learning. So yeah, this is all a holistic thing for us, you know, the health, the homeschooling, all that stuff is part of the same thing, you know.
Which I think is big. You know, I think what I see in the keto space is a lot of people are just dropping their carbs, increasing the fat, and then that's it.
Yep.
And they're on their phones at night, the TV's going all the time, they're
not
outside. So I really like to talk to people like yourself that are living the entire congruent life, because changing your diet obviously can be a major step in the right direction, but that's all you're doing in terms of your lifestyle change. You can't expect like transformations. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe.
No, I totally agree. There was, you know, I had a live the other day where the guy was just saying, you know, should I get on TRT? You know, because my thing is building muscle. And, you know, he said I was able to do this much with these diet changes. And I was like, well, where's your cortisol? What's your, what are you doing to stay in a parasympathetic state? What are your environmental, factors that may be getting in the way of that? And, staying under these blue lights, all these things, like you said, it's all part of the same thing. And I think when you start, it's okay to be like, I want to lose some weight, but I think from there, you got to continue to progress and just keep going further and see what else you can do, because it's more than just about, like you said, it's more than just about macros. It's about living your best life, being the best version of yourself, being the happiest you could be. And, for us, it's just a way of life, and when you do it so often, it just becomes natural,
Totally.
So.
Well, it's funny because what do you think, it's the chicken or the egg? Because once you get more healthy, you want to like keep fine tuning other aspects of your life, like your relationships, how you speak to your kids, your thoughts and all that sort of stuff. Do you think people need to hit a certain level of health before they can kind of start to like think next level, like, and believe in themselves that change is possible?
I think to an extent, yeah, because I think like if you're really just in a toxic environment where you're just eating the wrong foods and you're not, you can't even think straight, and so you're not even able to get those insights.
Oh, it's all good.
So you're not even able to get those insights and have your mind open to new things because you're in this like survival mode. But then I think, once you start to, your diet's fixed and your life becomes, things open up a little bit more and you start to think about, especially, I think there's a movement now, there's a growing number of people who are talking about this and focusing on this stuff. So obviously, I think the right time to start doing all these other things is now, but you may not get there until your diet's fixed,
That's a really good point. Yeah. Well, you're a pretty muscular guy. Were you into fitness before keto?
Oh yeah, absolutely. My whole life, I mean, when I was a little kid, I had to be in after school care and all the other kids were playing, out in the park and I was, in the playground with the guy taking care of us who was a bodybuilder. And so he was like showing me bodybuilding magazines and I was doing pull-ups with him when I was a little kid. And I have this one little thing that I filled out when I was 5 years old that it said, my name is Danny Vega. And it said, when I grow up, I want to be and I put strong man. I didn't know what that meant, but I just wanted to be a big, strong man. So growing up, I played football and I was into lifting early on. I had, a good mentor when I was 12 years old who just, had me focusing on doing compound lifts. And he didn't allow me to do any curls or anything like that. I was just frustrated by it. And so moving on through college, in the weight room, that was my favorite part of football. Obviously playing football was fun, but another great mentor was my college strength coach. And that, of course, because of his influence, that's what made me want to go on and get my master's and become a strength coach myself. So always been into the lifting aspect. And then, of course, the nutrition plays a huge role. And I think another person who was a big influence was John Berardi, Precision Nutrition. I was reading their stuff like 12, 13 years ago. And I thought, there's definitely, and I think a lot of people don't think about this, that, there's a huge part that nutrition plays in performance and feeling good. And I think a lot of people maybe look at it like, it's a quick fix to look better or something like that. But I've always been into all this stuff.
That's awesome, man. I similarly got into it early when I was like 12 years old. My older brother kind of hard on me, so I always wanted to like build that muscle and everything like that. Did you play collegiate football too? Yeah,
I played at Columbia University. So I had a chance to play at different schools, and I didn't even know what Columbia University was, but they recruited me and they invited me to an information session. And when I saw that this was in New York City, I was like, and then finally when I went on my interview or my college visit. When I did the college visit, I was hooked. And playing football in New York City has its challenges. You got to take a bus to the field, 100 blocks. But that was a huge part of going to college and learning probably half or less than half in the classroom, and the rest of it with the team and on the football field or roaming around New York City. That was definitely a really formative experience for me.
That's awesome. I was just in New York this last weekend.
Oh, awesome.
Columbia, where is that, like on the Lower East Side?
On the Upper West Side.
Upper West Side, okay.
Yeah, so
NYU's
it's on
Lower East Side, right?
Yeah, that's NYU. And so Columbia is on 116th and Broadway, and then the 1 train was actually created for the Columbia students, because this school is older than this country. It's the 4th oldest school. So when they built the lines, the 1 line goes up and down the island of Manhattan. So you take the 1 to 116th, you walk out, and you're at the gates of Columbia.
That's amazing.
So yeah, and then you get dropped in the middle of the school, and it's like you're on a college campus in a town somewhere. You don't hear anything in the middle of campus. It's really crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. Kind of like being in Central Park, like in the middle of Central Park, you know?
Yeah, all the horn honking and taxis and all that.
Yeah, that's just...
Make sure my phone's off. I thought it was. But it's not.
Yeah, I don't know what that was. You know, I think that was the coffee for us.
It's for me. I have this Nest thing. Our house got broken into, and so.
Oh yeah, we have the ring. We got the ring.
Yeah.
Last night I had to draw my gun. I was taking a shower, and they heard a pounding, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I go outside. It was nothing.
What kind of gun do you have?
I have a 9mm, and I have my Mossberg shotgun. So now that I did this hunting thing, now my life is going to get much more complicated.
Yeah, right. With the kids and keeping it safe, locking it.
Oh yeah, they respect the guns. But my 7-year-old is there's a homeschooling group that goes to the shooters world here, and it's led by a woman, and she's the one who teaches the concealed carry permit. And she takes homeschool kids, and she wants them to be 8 or older, but I'm gonna see if I could sneak them in at 7. If not, I gotta wait until February. So,
right. Not too bad.
But yeah, definitely like gun safety is huge, but I think the earlier they understand it, the more they respect it and the more safe things are, you know?
Totally.
Yeah.
That's key. Yeah, absolutely. And the impetus to learn more about that and teach your kid about that, is that hunting to become like more sustainable when it comes to food and everything?
Oh, that's a huge part of it, you know, but hunting, there's so much to it. I just was telling people, my experience, everything that we did was like a meditation. So if you're shooting the gun, it's a meditation. If you're walking and hiking through the forest, it's like a meditation. And there's so many times when you're just quiet. You have no service, no cell phone service. You know, when you're getting an animal in your sights and you're trying to control your breathing. And then of course, when you do get it in your sights, you're trying to, you know, dispatch the animal in as quickly as possible so there's no suffering. And I've repeated it a million times, but it's a point of pride for me that when I took my first deer, this thing was still eating grass and it dropped right away. And when I went to go pick up the deer, there was still grass in its mouth. You know, it didn't hear anything, it didn't see anything, it was lights out. And then for me to be able to, because I told Robert Keto Savage, the person who took me, I told him that I really want to be the one to process my animal. And I just told him I want to connect with my food, and the ability to take that animal and you know, skin it and quarter it and then serve it like, you know, an hour later, I can see why people get hooked. I'm pretty much hooked. Like I want to go 2 to 3 times a year. So yeah.
That's amazing. Now, did you process it in the field or pack it out?
So we had a mule, so you know those off-wheel, those 4-wheelers, and then we took that and we hung it at his cabin, and then he's telling me what to do as I'm doing it, and me keeping in mind that there's, you know, I watch Meat Eater TV, and Steven Rinella is just...
That's a good show.
Oh, he's just a student of the game. People don't understand, like hunters are the biggest conservationists. They are the ones that, you know, they're taking the whole animal. And I would watch this one show where he showed you how to process a deer over and over and over. And now I'm looking at myself doing it, hacking at things, you know, not making the cuts that he was making. But of course, with time, you just kind of get better at it. But it was amazing, man. It was honestly life-changing experience for me.
So cool. Yeah, I encourage a lot of people to do that. I'm not a hunter myself. My neighbor is, and I have friends that are. But I think it's key because, especially for kids, because sometimes I see my daughter, we have backyard chickens and 2 pigs.
Oh,
and
awesome.
And
we want to do that, but we can't do that here.
Yeah. There's an
My wife is obsessed with silkies. Do you have any silkies?
We don't have a silkie, I don't think. What do they look like?
They're the ones that have like really fluffy. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't. We have some with fluffy on the feet.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember all the breeds because we had a black copper Moran, a rooster, and he impregnated a bunch, so there's some mixes in there.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, chickens are awesome.
Yeah.
But I think it's important for because I see a lot of people like throwing away meat. They're like, oh, I get, you know, that didn't taste good, I'm just gonna toss it away.
Yeah.
So that, and I know you're big on animal protein for your physique and
Oh, yeah.
overall health.
Yep.
Do you think that your appreciation for where your food comes from is probably on another level after doing it yourself?
Oh, 100%. Like I never thought of this before, and I don't judge people who go and buy meat. You know, not everybody can go hunt, but now it seems to me, especially because my father he's Cuban, and he's what they call a guajiro, which is like a Cuban cowboy, Cuban redneck, you know. And he always wanted me to do that, and I never had the chance. And so he posted a picture of me with my first deer, and there were people who are not vegan, who are not vegetarian, and who are just saying, oh, how could you do that? And I'm just thinking, you know, I think you commented. And I was like, you know, there's no such thing as a meat farm. You can't, you know, you can't harvest fresh meat. You have to, it has to be killed. And, you know, hopefully it's not this feedlot operation that's terrible for the animal and terrible for us. It's, you know, for us, to me, obviously you start with wild, and then if you go from wild, you go to local, grass-fed, obviously, and then, you know, on the bottom of that list would be these, you know, huge mass scale operation. But I definitely do, you know, and it is important to use the whole animal, because if we're talking about meat being, you know, I always say, whether you don't have to be a carnivore, but I do think that you need to start with animal protein. And that's what my wife and I are always talking about with our boys. They just grew another ½ an inch in the last 2 months. They're off the charts. And so if you're starting with animal protein and you're saying and arguing that we are meant to eat meat, you need to eat the whole animal, because, you know, if meat is what you need, then you need the liver, you need the offal. And so we incorporate that in some creative ways with the boys. Like we grind liver, heart, and then we'll take some either Peterson's bacon, you know, some good bacon, and then ground beef, and it's a 2-to-1, you know, bacon and beef to offal, and we grind it into patties, and these kids don't notice. And so they're getting all the stuff they need, and they're none the wiser, you know?
So cool. Yeah, that's what we do too. You know, I mean, I personally love the heart, especially wild deer. It tastes so much better. So much
I wanted to eat the heart, but both times, both of the ones that we crushed, we literally shot them in the heart. And someone was like, oh, take a bite out of the heart. When I showed them, I was like, the heart is obliterated, you know? So I would love to try deer heart, because we said we weren't gonna eat until we killed something. And so the second day that we hadn't eaten, I'm in the tree with Robert, and I'm saying, I hope we get some heart, man. I want to show you how I prepare the heart. Do you have this at the cabin? Do you have that at the cabin? And because I like to take it and I'll brine it for several hours, and then I'll sear it on all sides, and then I'll put it on a plate and cover it loosely with aluminum foil and let it cook for another 15 minutes just there. And then I slice against the grain, and it's beautiful.
Amazing. Yeah. I do it a little bit. I just brine it as well, but then I take like a skillet with butter and rosemary and garlic and just mince it around. And it's pretty good. I mean, you know, there's some of the ligaments and stuff.
I try to cut that out, and I butterfly that first. I forgot to mention that, is I'll cut out all those, you know, all the vasculature and all the, you know, sinew, and then I'll butterfly it open as much as possible, and then when I sear it. But yeah, that is kind of the hard part, and the part that people are like, it's the same with tongue. When you see tongue, and you got to rip off the outer layer with tongue. So
you feel like you're making out with the animal. Just the texture of it. You see that,
you feel it in the little hairs, and
That is funny. Well, I love where this conversation is going, because I think it's much needed. Because, you know, if I post a picture of us or something, you know, killing a chicken in our backyard, you know, sometimes it gets flagged by Instagram because people find that offensive.
Yeah.
They post a picture of a chicken salad or Chick-fil-A. I don't know if Chick-fil-A is popular around here, but in our area, Seattle, they need their own security guard for the amount of cars.
Wow. Yeah, they have like, I bet they're like leading the way in finding ways to move these drive-through lines quicker, because you see them trying out different ways. Because we used to go there, and they charge twice as much because it's a convenience thing. You know, it's not because it's the best thing. It's obviously all the chicken has sugar in it and not the best ingredients, but mothers, I think, you know, will take their kids there because they can relax for a little bit and let the kids play. But yeah, people don't know that, they don't make the connection of where this comes from, you know?
Which is so key. Yeah. And I find people that are more traveled, like yourself, you know, and like John and other folks who go throughout the world, they see, because if you go to Bali, Indonesia, right, you see a chicken with its head cut off, guys on a scooter, and so you know where that chicken's going, right?
Yeah.
So people that are just it's like almost Americanized, it's an American thing that food just shows up in cellophane, and it's no animals were harmed, you know, anyway. But going back to what you were saying, so the deer literally had grass in its mouth.
Yeah.
I've come to appreciate that. There's some research in the journal. Have you seen the journal Meat Science before?
No.
It's crazy. It's in Elsevier, just Meat Science.
Oh, okay. I know that. I know Elsevier,
it's a sub-journal. But anyway, there's this notion of this pre-slaughter stress. These animals are like stressed on a truck, and no one seems to be talking about it, but you're a pretty intelligent guy, so I wanted to pose this question to you. we can absorb like microRNA and epigenetic material from the food we eat. How much of a factor do you think like the animals and their environment, how stressed they were, how does that affect the consumer when they eat that meat, do you think?
I think it does affect the consumer. I think one of the things, if you're going to buy local, that we look at, so we have a local farm that's out of St. Pete area that, well, he doesn't source it from there, but the farms are all local to here. And one of the things you want to ask is like, what's the process? You know, like, how does this go? You know, what's the cow going through in their lives? And, you know, the cows that we used to get would live most of their lives grazing pasture, and, you know, just a very calm life until they say it's one bad day. It's just one bad day of their life. They get taken and that's it. And it's lights out and it's over. Now, I know with epigenetics and, you know, our good friend Anthony J, he's an epigeneticist at the Mayo Clinic. He's helped us understand that like some of these stresses or even exposures to certain things, it doesn't take a lot. You know, for instance, like if an animal is exposed, for instance, if a fish is exposed to plastics or any of these phthalates, it doesn't have to be but once, that it can affect, you know, 2 to 3 generations after it. So I think it's super important, and I think people should be looking at that. And I think that the way I used to look at it before, for instance, we were paleo before, and my wife was all about this crunchy lifestyle. And I feel like I was kind of a hippie at heart, but there's certain things that people are like, that's nothing, you know? And you're starting to see that, yes, it is something, it is important, you know, where it's coming from, what's the process. And it's just another example of connecting with your food, you know? That's why buying local is awesome, you know, because you really get to learn about these things. So epigenetics is, I think, the future. You know, I have done my genetics, and people say, well, you have good genetics. And I was like, I look at my parents and I'm like, no. And then I look at my SNPs, I got a bunch of bad SNPs. And then I realize, you know, my lifestyle for the last 25 years has been completely given me the ability to not let any of these genes express themselves, you know? So I'm turning on the good stuff and leaving the bad stuff turned off. So that's a huge thing for us, you know? And I think in the future, it'll probably look something as easy as like, here's what's on right now, you know, where you get the 23andMe. Well, that's good, but tell me what's like turned on right now.
What's being expressed.
Yeah, what's being expressed right now, yeah.
That's key. I agree. I think there is, I can't remember, it was like 2 years ago, a cardiovascular panel looks at microRNA associated with like cardiovascular related inflammatory signaling pathways and stuff like that, but I don't know if it took off. I can't remember the name of the lab. It was a buddy of mine in Chicago was telling me that it was...
Well, if it gets more accurate and reliable, then obviously it goes through the pricing high end, and then hopefully, you know, healthcare starts with it, and then eventually it trickles down to us where we can buy it, hopefully. I'd love that. I'm super into that stuff. Yeah.
Totally. That's awesome. So getting back to like the tactics, when you were doing bodybuilding back when you were started 12 years old and all that, probably egg whites, broccoli, oatmeal, you know, the stuff that a lot of us kind of did back then. And then when did you start getting into keto?
So I had been paleo in 2011 or so. And then I was doing CrossFit, and then in 2013, I decided I need to do powerlifting. You know, I'm stronger than all these people, and I'm not getting to the level where I want to get with CrossFit. So when I moved into CrossFit, it was like, well, I need carbs, you know, and that's going back to what I'd learned in grad school and working with athletes, you need carbs. So we went backwards, actually. And then I was eating, it didn't matter the source, it didn't matter, none of that mattered, which it was obviously terrible because my wife was the one who suffered since we do everything together. And I had an injury in 2016 where I had torn my meniscus. I had to pull out of my last meet that I ever was gonna do. And I decided that I needed to get healthy. So I'm still now back in this bodybuilding mind frame. And so I had a bodybuilder friend of mine write me a diet. And I said, let me try this bodybuilding thing. And I had my fat low. And you know, you start with your carbs really high, and then you bring your carbs down, and then towards the end, your carbs are low, your fat's low, you're shredded, you're miserable. And I had like 3 weekends in a row where I had binge ate, you know, with my wife. And I was like, this can't be good. And at the same time, I had a friend of mine who was working with Dr. Jacob Wilson here in the lab at UT in my ear. you need to do keto. You need to check out these keto pancakes. Look at this keto recipe. And so I was like, oh, that's absurd. What are you talking about? And so finally, when I was at the end of it, I was like, you know what, we need to change. And it wasn't I was as lean as I wanted to be, but I wasn't feeling good. So I said, let me try this keto thing. And I said, listen, I want to learn more about this. So send me everything you got. And he sent me like 41 published papers. And I just ran through it. And then 2 days into it, because my carbs were already low and I had increased the fat, we had moved to Tampa and we were in a rental house with 2 stories. And I remember when I was powerlifting, I had to always, when I was walking down the stairs in the morning, it was like just feeling my joints, you know, and then like it took an hour for me to feel like I was properly like lubricated to move. And like within 2 days, I felt like that was gone. And I was like, okay, this is amazing. And so that's what got me into keto, and it was a quality of life thing. And then I was like, well, wait, why am I still losing weight? Like now I'm burning more fat. And so I started to eat more. And over the period of like 3 to 4 weeks, I had to increase my calories by like 1,000 just to stop the
weight loss.
Yeah, just to stop the weight loss. And I remember just feeling so much energy, and I had to get the energy out. Like I would be parking, because at the time I was still a medical device rep, so I was, you know, going to the hospital, parking further so I could walk more. And I remember it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was somewhere down south, and I was walking down a parking ramp, and I was like, wow, I really feel good. I usually don't feel this good at this time. And I had this increased productivity that led to me winning my first ever President's Club, which is like, you know, the top 7%. Yeah. And I was like, this is like life changing, you know? And so 2 months into it, after listening to Keto Evangelists and listening to some of these other podcasts, I was like, I want to do something with this. And it wasn't like I want to do something for a living. I just want to be involved. So I reached out to Brian, who's Keto Evangelist, and I said, hey, if you ever want to do anything with athletes, let me know. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even know what that meant. Maybe it was an interview. Yeah. So he interviewed me, and he said, I'm starting an athlete podcast. You want to be my first guest? Yeah. And so I was his first guest. And from there, he's like, we hit it off, and he said, do you want to be my co-host? So in August of 2016, I just started co-hosting with him, and I just was really curious about, and I wanted to just learn more, like what are the applications? Where could this fit in within someone's, you know, yearly plan? It doesn't have to be all the time, maybe, but there clearly has to be a role. Maybe there's this off-season role where you can use it to lower inflammation, or, you know, reset your leptin, or, you know, just reset your just healthy eating habits. And then maybe when it comes time to use that you really need carbs again. I don't know if you saw, there was a recent article that was just shared.
Ludwig in that?
Was it Ludwig? It was, well, no, this one was talking about like high intensity, and talking about how, you know, carbs are good for high intensity. And I'm not going to argue against that. I think for a lot of people who train from this, anywhere from 50 to 80% of your VO2 max, which is, I would say, is most people, there's no noticeable difference using carbs or fat once you're fat adapted. And then you get all the other benefits from being in a high fat, low carb environment. So I'm just been really curious, and we've had everyone from football players to pro rugby players, you know, all types of sports where you would think you need carbohydrate. And, you know, at high levels, you know, where you have people that have like sensors on their jerseys that are telling them their output and how fast they're going, and absolutely no changes except they're a few percentages lower on body fat.
Oh, damn.
You know? Yeah, like, darn, you know, you can operate at a higher intensity, maintaining lower body fat and feeling better. Rugby is the biggest example for me, because rugby is such a long season, and they're running about 30 to 35 kilometers a week or more. And, you know, there are people who are doing it, like our friend Paul Jordan. He's South African. He's out in France. He's been playing for 9 years. And, you know, that's another thing. You're older, and your body is not what it used to be. And so now you're in this less inflammatory environment. That's powerful, you know? So that's basically what we've been doing. And then from there is just looking at, you know, how do you eat ketogenic, and how do you eat a low carb, high fat diet with your family? Yeah. you know, because you start to improve your health and then you realize, wait, my kids are still eating crap, you know? So how do I do that? So that's kind of like where we're at now, where we want to share what we're doing with our family, with everybody else. And our boys are thriving. You know, they're doing awesome.
Very smart. Yeah, they came up and said hi to me right away, shake my hand, making eye contact. You know, they're not like on devices.
Oh my goodness, yeah. It's really crazy because when we go other places and we're with family, you know, our boys don't have a video game system or anything like that. This TV is mostly used for like, you know, we'll watch Netflix documentaries. Netflix has amazing like documentaries like Brainchild and Brain Games. And we're not afraid of technology per se. And we are very much, we give them the autonomy to, you know, use technology as a learning tool, but they still don't. Like they'll do it a little bit. And when we were younger, we were like, why can't they use it more? Give us a break, you know? But now we're like, you know, this is awesome. You know, because when we see these other kids, like when they're sitting next to the kids and the kids are playing the video games and you see the kids, they're like, I mean, you know, they're just completely not present. Yeah, they're not present and they're not, and all of those things, this is not by mistake, you know, all of those things add together, you know? So, I mean, I think we have some really unique problems in modern times that we have to address. You know, things are too convenient, things are too easy. Like I remember when I was a kid, if I wanted to, because I loved hip hop always, so I wanted to buy a hip hop tape, I had to save the $11 that took a few months, and then I would, my mom would have to pick a day where she did her errands and then she took me, and then hopefully I would get my hip hop tape, you know? Now, if my son wants something, he can click on Amazon and he can have it sometimes by the end of the day. That's kind of crazy, you know, in many ways. So not against technology at all, but, you know, we're losing a lot, and we're losing it, I think, more in the relationships, you know, where kids are not really having real relationships if they're spending all day texting and not interacting in person. And then they have these personas too. And then you meet them in person and they're a different person.
Yeah, I find that a lot in the influencer space. Yeah. That's super interesting. By the way, what devices were you selling?
So I have a funny story about that. Because I started in, I've been in women's health my whole career for when I was a device rep, and I was selling everything from pelvic floor repair, so all the slings for urinary incontinence, to, you know, having, you know, all these big cystoseals, all this, you know, when you get older, the women's, all the supportive stuff just stretches, and so they're either your uterus or your vagina or your bladder, all those things start to fall. And so I used to sell those. And then I've also done endometrial ablation for heavy menstrual bleeding. And I've done, you know, urethral bulking, a little bit of urology. And when I was on that trip, that President's Club trip, we had this really cool guide on this canoe excursion that we did. And he was from Canada, but he was living out in Turks and Caicos, just doing that. It's like, man, that's really cool. And so I'd start talking to the guy, and he's like, so you're a device rep, huh? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, you know, but, because I had a chip on my shoulder, because I was already kind of like realizing the company I worked for, they bought Monsanto last year. Wow. And I was like, oh my gosh, me and my friend she was another rep she used to be a vegan, and I got her to be keto. We were both like, this is not good. This is such a conflict of interest for us. So I said, you know, I work for a big, you know, pharma company, but at least, you know, the things that I'm selling, I mean, you can't quite do them, you know, naturally, you know. It's not like I'm selling statins. Mm-hmm. The head of the statin, who ran one of the biggest statin drugs was right behind me. Oh my God. And he was like, well, hold on there a second. And I said, oh my goodness. Well, you know what, I was backpedaling and stuff, but you know, I wouldn't doubt that a lot of these people believe what they're saying, because you're seeing that the statin is lowering the cholesterol, and the cholesterol is the thing that needs to be lowered for health to be better. And every time, you know, something comes out that is against it, there's always, you know, a flaw in the study, and there's always they try to really keep you jazzed up and believing in it. But after a while, it just didn't work anymore, you know, and then the culture part of it was tough too.
I can see that. I was in sales for 13 years as
Okay.
a supplement rep for doctors, for practitioner-only brands. So I got to see a lot of different things. But yeah, the companies want you to be fired up about your product and stuff like that. So I was just curious to see along those lines. But kind of going back, when you were transitioning, by the way, when you were doing powerlifting, what was your best lift? Was it deadlift or squat?
Deadlift was my best. Yeah, I'm built to deadlift. You know, I have a torso that's this big. My wingspan is 6'3.5", but I'm 5'11". So I hit 700 in competition at 220. You know, my squat was 640. My bench, the most I ever hit in competition was 400. So while I can deadlift because of my long arms, that hurts my bench. But that was definitely something that, you know, it got me top 25 in the country at the time. But then you start to realize the things that you have to put your body through to get to that next level is, you know, and, you know, you're winning possibly a trophy, a Denny's card, or maybe like a, you know, an all-you-can-eat buffet or something, and a t-shirt. And, you know, you're around people who lift more than you too. And so you think, wow, I'm just not strong enough. And so you want to keep chasing that number. But after a certain while, there's like, for instance, when you're getting ready for a meet, that last month, you're miserable to be around because you're just feeling like crap and you're just beat up, and, you know, your relationships suffer. It's kind of like a bodybuilding, you know? And so it's not something that I would do now. I think that lifting heavy is really important, you know, for everything from your hormones to, the strength of your bones and, you know, all that stuff, your connective tissue. But in reality, for me, there was a point there when I was like, okay, I'm a dad now. I almost missed my second son's birth. It's not that I almost missed it, but she was like getting to her due date. And I didn't take my third attempt on deadlift because I had already qualified for a big meet that day. So I drove home 2 hours, and luckily she didn't go into labor. But yeah, those are the type of things that you're like, okay, let me, for me now, being the best dad that I can be. Because, you know, we look at this as, of course, for ourselves, but as corny as it sounds, we want to, like, there's things with the world that we don't like and we want to change them. And we've tried in other ways in the past, like we've tried with the political process, for instance, and that was garbage. And so when we realized that we couldn't, we realized, okay, how can we change things? So for us, it was what's under our control. So the way we eat is under our control. How we spend our money, what we spend our money on, teaching our kids to be, you know, emotionally intelligent kids, taking them around the world. And it doesn't cost money, a lot of money to travel. It doesn't, you know, and just exposing them to as much as possible, because then we create, I wouldn't say that we're trying to mold them into us, but I think that they do end up thinking the way we think. And, you know, everybody thinks that the way they think is right. And so I think, you know, where you have two of us, now you have four of us. And then they find partners that are similar to them, and then that's how the world changes. I think, I always forget her name. Oh, Jackie Eberstein. She used to be Dr. Atkins' nurse. Okay. And I was talking to her at the first KetoCon in 2017 that about this whole movement and how it's growing. And she said that there's just no way that this will ever be a movement that starts with the top down. Yeah. It's going to be grassroots movement. So we have to influence and use our influence to change people. And that's why it's weird when, you know, we're always trying to interact with everyone, and when they ask us questions and we get back to them, they're like, well, you're the first person who I ask who gets back to me. And that to me is like, well, if you're really saying that you want to change the world, you want to change lives, why aren't you answering their questions? Why aren't you doing, you know, helping people?
Like on Instagram DM.
Yeah, on Instagram DM. Yeah. You know, sometimes it could be 5 days before I answer, but, you know, they are trying to learn. We're all on the same journey. We're just like on different parts, different levels. Yeah.
That's a really good point. I like that you think that way, and that makes sense. I mean, we got to focus on our locus of control. People sometimes watch the news and get pissed off, and they, you know, worry about things they have no control over.
Oh, yeah.
You're saying your family, your kids, their mindset, their ability to, you know, experience different cultures, be open to that, traveling, I think is key for resiliency and all that. So I commend you for that. So yeah, deadlifting 700 pounds, that's awesome, dude.
Luckily I didn't.
Like 460.
Oh, but what was your body weight though?
Let's see, that point I was like 195. Right now I'm
Yes.
like 185.
Yeah, so like, it was less than me, but you weighed less than me as well,
Yeah.
So
My torso and femur length, it doesn't lend itself.
my femur length for squatting too, like, you sumo, okay.
Yeah. Are you sumo as well?
I've always been comfortable with just the conventional deadlift, but when I squatted, my wife would joke that like, it just looks like it hurts,
Does it hurt your back?
Not really. I never had any back issues, but I was kind of a hip dominant squatter because of the length of my femur. For me to get to that, and I had good depth. I wasn't a high squatter, but for me to get to that depth, I was more at an angle. I had a low bar squat. So, and that's why when I got to Ben, when we started training together, it was like he would give me a way higher angle on these wedges that he put on the ground. I don't know if you use those with you.
Yesterday, yeah.
He had to give me the highest angle because of the length of my femur to get to the angle that he gets at. I had to get on a higher incline so I can get to that depth, because I would just go to a certain point, and I'm used to a powerlifting squat where this is my groove, and he's like, if you really want to challenge your quads, you have to go deeper. So and I couldn't do that without compromising my low back. I would have like my back would start to what do you call it, butt wink?
Yeah. That's key. I mean, he's reframing me because I was going to do my second powerlifting competition in February.
Awesome.
And I'm like, dude, it's just I like having his influence. Just in one day, I'm rethinking the whole thing because it's the powerlifting is like you do 3 lifts, right?
Yeah.
Bench, squat, deadlift, and so forth, and everyone kind of does it the same. Your stance can be slightly different, but you can go put a wedge under there.
Oh no, yeah, you couldn't. Yeah, with powerlifting, I think it would be okay because you only have to. You're not focusing like Ben does on the best muscle contraction. You're just focusing on hitting the right depth, And so if you have the right mobility, and with powerlifting, the most important thing to me is, you can't be too loose. You need to be tight actually. So when I would warm up with my squats and things like that, I would do things to activate, but not to loosen up. So I would use like, the Mark Bell,
Slingshot.
Yeah, the slingshot. So I would do walks with that. So my whole hip girdle was firing, and I would do bird dogs so that my back, because for me, I've always been terrified of having an injury.
Yeah.
So I would incorporate things daily that would be like prehab. And for everybody thinks, okay, you need a strong back. Yes, you do, but mostly you need a resilient and a back with endurance. And so like, it doesn't matter how strong your back is, most of these injuries that you see are bending over to pick something up, and they're throwing out their back. And so, of course, along with moving like an athlete at all times, not bending over to tie my shoe, getting down on one knee, bracing when I go to pick something up. I don't even notice it anymore because every time I pick something up, I'm always bracing, I'm drawing it in and bracing. But doing the right things beforehand, like I said, like the bird dogs and, even warming up my shoulders by doing the McGill pushups. I'm a big fan of Stuart McGill. I don't know if you've seen his stuff.
I've seen his work. Haven't really followed it too much, but
yeah.
Let's finish up on like pre and post workout nutrition. So for me personally, I find like if I do squats, deadlifts, powerlifting stuff, like I personally like to incorporate, I'm mostly keto, been keto for over 3 years, but if I'm pushing the needle and multiple sets, high volume, I like to have carbs in the workout. What are your thoughts with intra-workout or post-workout carbs for a low-carb athlete?
Oh yeah, so I think that, so I can't comment on competing that way because when I became keto, I was no longer powerlifting. But what I can say is that it would make sense, especially on the day of the meet, to bring in some carbs, because if you're fat adapted, I say this all the time, those carbs become a PED. Yeah. I hadn't had any carbs for like 2 years, and then in April I rode 50,000 meters for charity. And I spoke to Peter Defty. I don't know if you've ever spoken to him.
Had him on the show.
Oh yeah,
Great
so
guy.
50,000 meters I think is like 30 something miles maybe.
Yeah, it's over a marathon.
Yeah, because the marathon's like what, like 30 or something?
Yeah. Wow, that's insane. Good for you.
Yeah, well, with the rower, I'm built to row because, my long limbs. But, I knew that it was going to be, kind of challenging, but I knew that if I spoke to Peter, because he helped me fuel for my first half marathon, which is another thing that I did when I was keto, I said, well, hey, I guess I can run now. Let's do a half marathon. And he's like, don't be afraid of the carbs, you know? And so the night before he said, have 250 to 300 carbs. And so I had like 280 carbs in the form of sweet potato. And I think I even had some potato. And then I woke up that morning, my blood sugar was slightly elevated, but I still had ketones. And he said, do as much as you can fasted. So what I did is I ended up doing 37,000 meters fasted. And at that point, I stopped. I had 80 more carbs, which was sweet potato again. And with, you know, it would be a little bit of fat too, some eggs or some meat. And I think I have pictures of it all. We have a YouTube video, it's not edited, and we still haven't, this is like from April. Yeah. And by the end of that last 13,000 meters, I tested and my blood sugar was 68, my ketones were 4.4. And the ability to be fat adapted really means to me that you can have those carbs and go right into fat burning. But with powerlifting, it doesn't even matter. You know, with powerlifting, I would say if you wanted to play around with it, I don't have the personal experience to say this is what you would do, but I would assume as you get closer to your meet and you're usually if you're doing like a 10-week meet prep, I would say week 6, 7, and 8 are when you hate your life. You know, it's like when you're going the heaviest, you're taking like maybe your first attempt to see how you feel. I would say those weeks would be smart to do some. If I'm using carbs, I like using them after my workout.
Me too.
Yeah, because I don't think, I'm not sure, especially with the implications of what would happen with insulin and how that could interfere with my training during the workout. But I think that it could help with recovery, especially if you're just like a little bit burnt out, and carbs do help with that, you know? And so I would say that would be something that I'm open to. I'm still trying to figure this thing out, like for these high performing athletes who are used to performing at a certain level, and if they go keto and they don't perform as well, they're not going to do it, you know? And so if we look at like a cyclical approach, well, the only thing we can see right now is like a 2-day carb up, and that didn't turn out well. Like it was the only one that I could think of is where they put these bodybuilders on a slight deficit. And, you know, one group was strict keto, the other group was cyclical keto, and they did a 2-day carb up. The cyclical keto, they both lost the same amount of weight, but the cyclical keto lost a lot more lean mass. And then they weren't registering ketones again until like Wednesday, Thursday. And so you're not benefiting from the possible muscle sparing effects of the ketones if you're not in ketosis. And so that didn't turn out well. But what about one meal? What about one day? You know, what about the food sources? What if you're eating real whole foods? And so one of the groups that I'm really, really interested in is the Paleomedicina people. I don't know if you've heard of them, the Hungarians. They follow kind of like a very much carnivore diet, and their main concern is intestinal permeability, you know, gut health. But it's interesting because they don't really eat carbohydrates, but if they do, they'll eat tubers, and they're comfortable with tubers. So that's sweet potatoes. And then they don't use sweeteners, but if you do sweeten your food, they use a little bit of honey. So if I'm consuming some honey and some sweet potatoes, and someone such as myself who can literally probably eat 100 carbs a day and still be in ketosis, you know, what does it matter if I, and I have to be clear because we're also trying to help people. And, you know, if people see, you know, me eating sweet potato, they're thinking, oh, well, sweet potatoes are cool now. You know, so it's one of those things that I want to make sure that we're talking to the right crowd. You know, if we're talking to the performance crowd, they probably have earned those carbs and they probably can use those carbs. But I think it would be great. Like, I'm just curious with you, are you using like a fast acting carb, or what are you trying to, you know, what are you taking in?
Yeah, it really depends on the activity, the volume, where I am in the training cycle, and how I feel. I'll bring sometimes, organic dried mangoes, just like chew on them.
Yeah, dried
just because
mangoes.
it's like just really quick. And I've come across some interesting research on the insulin-independent uptake of glucose. Interestingly, just nitric oxide and some of the interleukin-6 associated causes glucose to go in independent of insulin. So
especially with the mangoes, because they're fruit.
Yeah. So experimenting with that. But or else I'll do like purple sweet potatoes, celiac.
Oh, I love those purple sweet potatoes.
So
love them. Yeah.
So I just play around with it, and I'm just trying to see. And at first I was kind of scared because I was like, man, I've spent like 2 years trying to get into this fat adapted state. state? Am I going to ruin it all? And I was surprised, like 2 hours later, I still was like 0.6 millimolar on beta hydroxybutyrate.
Oh, I believe it.
So
yeah.
I was like, you know what am I doing this keto thing for? I don't have a brain issue or autoimmunity or cancer that I know of, at least. So it's like I can be mostly keto, and then if I want to push it in the gym. So I was just curious, like.
Yeah, it's confusing to me. I mean, I guess it's not that confusing when we realize that people want to make things simple and they want to be able to depend on this. Like, for instance, they want to depend on me to give them the information for their diet. And then I'm complicating things, or you're complicating things if you're talking about it. And they're like, this is not, so you're not carnivore anymore? You know, because I'll go periods where I'm just carnivore, and because it's convenient, I feel good. But then I've never decided in my, I think it would be weird to say I'm never going to eat a plant again, or I'm never going to eat a carb again. Why would I do that?
Yourself.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us, you know, whatever diet you follow for a while, there's always the potential for, you know, deficiencies and imbalances to come up. And so it doesn't make sense for me, especially if I'm trying to perform at my best, to not try to include some things that, because yeah, as humans, we can eat a certain way and be fine, but as athletes, it's a whole different story. So I still don't know enough, and I think I'm still super interested in that stuff, and I totally volunteer myself as a guinea pig. And my boys too, like my boys it's bulk season now. They've been doing jiu-jitsu for like over a month, and they're just keep growing. And now with jiu-jitsu, this added activity, they're like getting leaner. And I'm like, I don't need them to be leaner. I need them to try to add some muscle. So we're using the yams, we're using the sweet potatoes and other starches along with, and still it's real food. You know, we know where it's coming from. It's organic. And so, but I don't know, some people, they want to say keto or not keto. I understand. I don't think people should be pigging out or cheating. I would never advocate that. But if you're trying to figure something out, the worst thing that can happen, there's really no downside. I mean, you may feel bad, but you still learn something from it, and you know, okay, that doesn't work, you know?
Such a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why testing at home is good. I know you encourage that, looking at glucose and
Oh, yeah,
ketones.
yeah.
Where do you like people, I mean, maybe it's different for an athlete, non-athlete, but protein, do you like people to track macros, or are you kind of more like based upon your activity?
I think that, so for instance, with my coaching, I will give people like a starting macros, and then we don't change that for 2 weeks, because regardless of what we may think, like we don't really know, you know, like, so like for me, the macro thing is I'm only going to do it if there's a specific goal. And even then, I'm going to observe, because you can have two people eating the same calories. One was under eating, and so it affects them really well. And one, you know, maybe it works differently in that their metabolism is different. So it's just, you know, I think that protein's super important. And so I always start with protein. And so I would think that if I was to track, the most important thing that I would track would be the protein. But then there's another thing that I'm also playing with now, which is looking at, for instance, I had just yesterday a client who's been keto for a year, who's like, you know, I had my blood sugar in the 70s and 80s, and now my blood sugar's now in the 90s, you know, and up to 100. And now, you know, I'm really interested in this, you know, personal fat threshold, because if you're a person who's pretty sedentary, eating a ketogenic diet, eating a high fat version of it, and your cells are replete with fat, you know, I hate to tell people, but there's a possibility that you can develop some insulin resistance, and we're not trying to address that. You know, I think we should look at that, you know, and so bringing that fat down and cycling that fat would possibly, so I'm playing around with that.
You know, I have seen that in carnivores, some folks that are really, really kind of high protein.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
The body, the gluconeogenesis kind of kicks up a little bit, especially in athletes too. And then like post-exercise, people think, oh my gosh, am I becoming a diabetic? Because they're fat adapted, they do like sprints or intervals,
Yeah.
glucose shoots up, but then it drops back down.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed, which was interesting, was that, you know, there was like an increase in my fasted glucose numbers when I bumped up the protein. I was, you know, my first year I had my protein even pretty low. And just because I'm kind of a contrarian, I was like, you know, people kept saying you need protein. I was like, Well, no, you don't. Watch, and then I would, but I'm also very metabolically flexible. I had times when had my protein as low as 75 grams a day. I definitely don't recommend that. I don't think it's something that's sustainable. But when I added the protein back and I went over and above, I'm talking about I went from on average 130 to 160 up to 200 plus, 250 plus, and nowadays sometimes 300. I don't try to do that, but some days I'll eat a bunch of meat and I'll see what it is, and I'm like, well, I just had 300 grams of protein. I felt better, but my fasted glucose numbers were higher, and there is a glycogen dump. There's kind of this release of glycogen, and I think it's important for people who are trying to control their blood sugar to know that I don't think you need to have your blood sugar at 60 or 70. If you have it that low, you're not going to be probably healthier if it's even lower. I mean, I haven't seen anything to convince me of that. I think that if you do have your protein higher and it jumps up a little bit, that is something that, you got to monitor and see how you feel. What I do get concerned with is people I have friends who have insulin resistance and, brought their insulin down, and then the insulin goes back up after a long time from that. Then that's where, I think Dr. Bickman's talk from Low Carb Breckenridge, I think that's a really good one, because he talks about the role of glucagon and insulin, and he says it himself, yes, there's really no, you shouldn't be as concerned in a low carb environment about your protein because of the fact that the insulin is so low, but maybe you should wait until your blood sugar's regulated and your insulin's in check before you decide to play with it, But there's still, the other thing that I noticed, which was, I was like, okay, fine, my blood sugar's fasted is higher. What about postprandial? And that's where my mind was blown, because I was like, I am so insulin sensitive with this diet that I could eat. First, I started with the pound, which was 100 and, I think it was 157 was what the grams of protein that I got up to, which was maybe a pound and a half. I forgot what it was. And I kept on eating and then testing at an hour, 30 minutes, an hour, and 2 hours. And I was like, blips, no effect until I got past 2 pounds, and then there was an increase, and it wasn't completely back to baseline in 2 hours. And I said, okay, that is my threshold. I can't go to there. So you can be insulin sensitive and have higher blood sugar, but it's also what's going to be sustainable for you. Because I know that I can eat a lower protein version of keto and I'll feel awesome with my brain and the way things work, and I think I'll be healthy. But at the end of the day, I'll be wanting more meat. I'll be I want a little bit more meat.
Because you're you feel you can't push it in the gym, or you're not.
I think it won't even be that. I think it's just I will feel I'm not satisfied, and it may be a mental thing. It's not even, with me, satiety is a very complicated thing, because I ate for so many years past satiety because I wanted to grow. So I have to look at satiety, and I think we all experience satiety in different ways. We have the mechanical stretch of the stomach, and that's probably what most vegans are depending on, because they need to eat all this volume to feel full. And of course, your body has ways of knowing the nutrients that you're taking in, and so you eat a nutrient dense diet, and you'll have I can eat 2 pounds of muscle meat, but I'll eat 12 ounces of liver and I'll be stuffed. So, and then of course you have your hunger hormones, you have your ghrelin, your leptin, and your other hunger hormones, and so you kind of have to look at all of those. And I think a version of keto that addresses those well for you is the one that's going to work. That's how I see it.
Such a good point. Yeah, I think so many of us, especially if we've played football or whatever, we're trained to eat, especially as men, and I think women, it's society trains them to do the opposite.
The opposite.
It's
it's not ladylike to eat meat.
Yeah.
They kind of, and my wife, I'm so thankful for her, because if it wasn't for her increasing her protein, she wouldn't feel the way she feels now. She feels better with higher protein, and a woman's not going to listen to me. She's going to listen to her, so.
That's a good point. What got her finally to do that? Was it another woman? We were taking a trip to Puerto Rico, and I was, on the plane there, I said, look, I've been doing this carnivore thing now for almost a month. It was in August of 2017.
And I'd like for you to see about increasing your protein, eating more meat. I said, listen to this talk with Amber O'Hearn and listen to this other talk with Georgia Ede, the psychiatrist, which is one of our favorites. We love her. And at that time, she was trying to burn some fat. And so the way we liked to do it back then was we would lower the calories a little bit and we would increase the volume on the salads to give us that satiety. And she was waking up in the middle of the night to vomit. Like she was feeling like crap, and it wasn't like just some bad lettuce that she had one day. It was different. And so she said, it wasn't even me who said, try this. She said, you know what? When we landed in Puerto Rico, she had listened to one or two things and she said, I'm just gonna try not eating any vegetables this weekend. So I'm just gonna eat meat. And she lost like 3 pounds, which, you know, for a woman, that's a lot. And she felt amazing. And so now we know more, because it may not be the vegetables that are these evil things that are hurting her. It's that she had a sensitivity to lettuce. So, and that was one of the many things she was sensitive to. But for her, she sees it in a way like, I don't need to do guesswork when I just eat meat. You know, the worst thing that could happen is my meat was cooked in vegetable oils and I feel like crap, or the seasoning had onion because she's sensitive to onion. And some of the things, well, by the way, onions in everything. So
I love onions.
I love it so much. And it's hard for me because when I'm marinating our meat, I have to make our marinades because every seasoning has onion. But she felt the best she's ever felt with, you know, meat. And now in the past year, we continue to grow. We continue to try to improve and enhance. And then we start to learn about things like, we learn a lot from Allie Miller. We love Allie Miller and her whole food, real food keto approach. And, you know, my wife has, you know, issues with her hormones. We have a test sitting there to test her progesterone because we think she might be, you know, deficient in progesterone because she has issues with her cycle. She has certain issues around her cycle that indicate she may have an issue with progesterone. And so what she's been doing the last 2 months is including some carbohydrate around her cycle, like after ovulation. And unbelievable, her cycle was 25 days. So she has a bad week before, a bad week after. So that leaves her with maybe 10 to 14 days of the month where she feels good. And so she'll take, you know, maybe some dates, like 2 dates, and she'll have it with like a nut butter, or she'll have some extra sweet potato or something on those days, and she's feeling better. So yeah, I think it's weird, and you know, more power to you if you found like the Michaela Petersons who finally found it. But if you maybe, a lot of that is in the beginning and then what happens over time. And so we have to look at what happens over time. And so if you continue to search for the right thing, I think that what worked for me a few years ago may not work for me a few years from now too. So.
Well, and then having the mindset to be open-minded about it, you know,
oh, yeah.
Change. Because I think sometimes, especially once people get on social media, they find keto, they find carnivore, they do paleo, you start posting, they change their handle to whatever, paleo
Keto.
Tom, whatever,
yeah.
And then they're stuck. And then they're like, I am only paleo, I can't do this keto thing, I can't do this, you know. And so I think having the mindset that like I can navigate, I can be flexible based upon the season, what my workouts are, my hormones, where I'm in my cycle. I think that's the big take-home message, at least for me in this conversation.
Oh, I totally agree. I think that, you know, when you do, especially if you haven't focused on your health. I mean, I used to see this with CrossFit too, where people had never worked out before and they found CrossFit and it was the best, you know, and they were like, well, if it's not CrossFit, it's not good. Mm-hmm. And the same thing happens, you know, I have someone that finds keto and, you know, it's the first time that they actually take control of their health. Then they're like, if it's not keto, it's not good. And I'm just here thinking like, well, I did well without keto. Granted, like when I was eating the wrong things, that was bad. But, you know, it's important to like be open to other things because it's just weird to be dogmatic like that. You don't learn that way, you know? And so we're always trying to be open to learning, especially listening to the opposite, you know, if you can stomach it, listen to the opposite side. And
yeah, I do often. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love to hear what vegans and vegetarians are
saying,
you know?
Or even people who think that, you know, keto's terrible or low carb and high carb is the way, you know, sometimes their delivery is terrible and sometimes they're not, you know, nice people. but sometimes they make you think, you know, and then you're like, okay, if I'd like to know how that's addressed or if that can be addressed, you know. I think it's important. It's because then you can have a better, deeper knowledge. That's why Ben is like, you know, I love Ben because Ben's, you know, open to all of these things. And then we can find something that can maybe work together with some other stuff. Maybe it is kind of cool to do paleo in the summer because, you know, what's better than like a nice in-season fruit that's delicious, you know, like organic, that maybe you grew in your backyard, you know. So we can't just say that all carbs are evil all the time. You know, there's a role for them, and they exist, and we've been able to use them over the years. So and when I say these things, I wonder, are people thinking that I'm changing? Oh, now he's not keto anymore, because I hear that, you know, like, well, you're not keto anymore, you're not carnivore anymore. And I'm like, well, I'm not doing this. I'm open to it. You know, I'm not myself doing this. I'm not trying to excuse what I'm doing or prepare you for some new change. I'm just saying maybe this can work, you know? So
it's key. Yeah. I mean, and it's okay if you change your mind on things.
Yeah, it's totally okay.
You know, I was with David Perlmutter last night, and he's kind of actually changing his perspective on meat. As he gets older, he finds for him, vegetables and things that he's making are better digested, right? So but his thing and more fish-based, and not that meat's bad. He's just like, for him, you know.
And he's in Naples, so he's probably getting some good fish over there, hopefully.
And in the summer, he's on his boat all the time. So he's like, it's just not practical to like freeze this stuff. I'd rather just get fish.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, the undertones of this conversation, hopefully the take home for all you all, is be open-minded, you know, and not locked into something forever just because it used to work. You know.
Yeah, like I'll quote Ali because I love how she says it. You know, doctrine creates disconnect. You know, if you're just, you know, sticking to your guns like this, you know, it's one thing to have principles that you live by, and I totally get that, and I have those. I have non-negotiables. I'm never gonna eat grains. You know, I'm never gonna eat a ton of sugar. You know, but then if there's some real foods that are whole foods that could enhance my performance or my diet, I think that's a good thing, you know?
I love it, Danny. All right, so if there's only one exercise you could do forever, just one.
I've thought of this one before. I think the reason why I picked the deadlift is because you don't need a spot. You know, I think the squat is an awesome movement, but, you know, you put a bar on your back, if you go past a certain weight, you know, you need a spotter. And so the deadlift gives you that full body workout, but all you literally, if you pick it up and you can drop it, you know, executed well, it's a full body lift. You get those hormonal effects, those hormonal, it gives you that testosterone release after. So it's, you know, you get your back, you get all the musculature in your back, your whole posterior chain, you know, even your quads, your legs, and your grip strength. So I love that one. I think if I had to pick three, which I'm breaking the rules, but I would definitely like some sort of overhead press movement, and some, like, the ability to pull yourself up, I think is huge, especially nowadays where we're in this super kyphotic lifestyle where we're sitting in the car driving, and then we get on our computer, and then everything is like, you know, we're just so kyphotic, and, you know, how many hours are we working out? We're only working out like one or maybe 1 out of 12 hours of the day that we're awake, you know, and if we're not trying to train and address those things and you know, open ourselves up, and it helps your posture. So love pull-ups. We have a pull-up bar in there, and I have actually this morning I had Desmond. I took my 7-year-old through a pull-up workout. Like we train, and he's a little meathead. So yeah,
that's awesome. I have a little girl, 6 years old. I put her on the bar, and I just say, all right, you're just gonna hang, and then she's like, get me, and I always like 10 or 15 seconds afterwards, so I know she's like, you really can't hang, and then I grab her and stuff, and it's just good grip strength, and now she can do the monkey bars like no problem.
Oh, so yes.
It was cool to get her to that point.
Yeah, he's not doing pull-ups, so I'll jump him up, and then he'll hold himself for a little bit, and then we'll do negatives. So we do three negatives at a time. So he used to always just go like this and then drop, and now he's going the full length of the muscle. So there's a progression there, and then we'll go from there. We'll go to jumping pull-ups, and so he'll be able to jump himself up and do negatives, and eventually he'll be able to do a pull-up. And
that's key.
That'll be awesome.
Do you think there's a a limit or an age limit when kids can start resistance training? Remember most gyms when we were kids, it was like you had to be 14 or older to get in here. I mean, why not start when they're like 7? I mean, obviously not hitting the deadlifts, right? But doing things like you're doing, I mean.
Yeah, I know that, like, for instance, like the National Strength and Conditioning Association, I think they are very conservative, and they'll say, like, 12 to 14 for boys, and for some reason the girls can start a little bit earlier. I really don't think it's an age. I really think it's your intramuscular coordination, your ability. If you can execute really good squats, and you can execute perfect push-ups, then you can load yourself. Why not? It all depends on. You look at these gymnasts, these kids are like 7 years old, 8 years old. They're doing, they're putting weights on their ankles and doing pull-ups. And so all of these kids would benefit. And we know that the first principle is progressive overload. So, if he really wants to, especially if your kid wants to be strong, and, I always say, like, when Desmond's like, I'm going to be strong like you when I grow up, I'll say, well, if you want to be, you'll be stronger than me because I'll help you. But if you don't want to be, you don't have to be like me, because he's also like a pleaser. Like, he wants to please me. It's to the point where, like, I've had to in the past say, it's okay if you don't think the same. Like, when we started eating lots of meat, he said that his favorite steak was ribeye. And I started to see that he wasn't really eating all of the ribeye. And then when I would feed him sirloin, he would like it more. He likes it leaner. I said, that you could like sirloin. And of course, from there, when he realized it's okay not to like what I like, have the sirloin. But Dean loves the ribeye, my 4-year-old. and they want it bloody. Like, they want meat. They want it like medium rare, and they want salt and blood. That's like how they like it.
That's awesome. And my daughter too. I mean, I try not to influence what she eats, just to see.
Yeah, it's hard.
She'll go for the meat.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I don't let her eat junk, and we don't have junk in the house, But when we put vegetables around or whatever, she just goes right to the meat. And I'm like, well, that's pretty interesting.
And it's something cool that happened was when we don't try to, like, limit their vegetables at all, but we're not eating that many of them. And so about a month ago, Desmond was like on this vegetable kick. Like, he wanted, when we were away in Amish country with Bunker Hill, he had one day when he had asparagus twice in the day, and then he was like, when we got back, he's like, I want vegetables again. I want to eat more vegetables. And then my wife is like, we need to make a video about this. Like, you want to get kids to eat vegetables, don't make them eat vegetables, because then he started to eat like all of the vegetables. And so, like, they'll go through periods, and I think it carries into every area of their lives. It's amazing how, when kids are able to auto-regulate, how they make the right decisions. So when we used to give, like, an allowance for food when we'd go shopping, we started doing that like 5 years ago, like $10. He would make the right decisions. Like, sometimes he would buy things that was like, how do you know about this? He's like buying kefir. And I'm like, why are you buying kefir? He probably saw the bottle, probably looked good. And so we don't have bedtimes, but they go to sleep when they're tired, and they never go to sleep late. But maybe sometimes they go to sleep late, but so do we. We do that too. And so, like, even with things like sharing, well, how are you gonna get them to share? Our biggest thing is, personal property rights. And so my child values his property, and he's not clingy with it, because if he, I think what happens when you do this, I know I'm getting on a soapbox here,
awesome.
but it's like everything else. Like, it's amazing when you give kids the ability to make their own decisions. And for instance, with the sharing thing, unfortunately, what happens is that a child is told share, and then they don't know when they're gonna get their toy back. And so they're so clingy. And my wife noticed this when she does it to other kids. Like the parent is saying, share with them, and my wife is like, no, that's okay. And she'll ask the questions as simple as like, how much longer do you think you're gonna be on there? We'll wait. And the kid will say like 5 minutes. And then the kid will be like really confused. And then after like 30 seconds, they'll be done and they'll leave. Because then you realize, like, if you put the decision making in their hands, you realize that autonomy is what they want. And sometimes if you don't give it to them, they'll make decisions that go against their best interests just to keep their autonomy. So yeah, like, it's kind of like with everything that we do, when we give them the power to make their decision, and I think it sticks better too. When you tell them, we talk about how you said you don't want to influence them, and you know they want to please you. Last year we were in Miami, and the kids were with their cousins, and they were under the table sneaking French fries. And I got sad, you know, like thinking about that. Like, you guys know that it's okay to eat a French fry, right? Like when they say, "Can I eat this?" I'm like, whose body is it? It's your body. You can eat what you want, but like, you know, what is that going to do to you? You know, this is what could happen, but at the end of the day, it's your body, you know. So when you ask me certain things, it kind of makes me think of those things.
No, it's awesome. So what if they want Coke? What would you say?
Oh man, I can tell you that with certain of them, I'm a little bit more of a drill sergeant when it comes to certain things. My wife, not as much. For instance, she just gave an example about the kids were somewhere, and someone was saying they were selling those like food dye and high fructose corn syrup things. I think they call them snow cones. And the kids really wanted a snow cone, and it's literally red dye and high fructose corn syrup. And she's like, you know, eat them, who cares? And if it was me, I would have been like, no, what are you doing? Why can't? And she's got other concerns that I don't have as much, but maybe I should have. Like, I don't want my kids to have an eating disorder. I don't want them to have issues growing up because of things that we didn't allow them. And the other thing that happens too is that this happened like a year ago now. We were at a birthday party visiting friends in Miami, and it was at one of these play places with all this stuff, and there was pizza and cotton candy. And within 10 minutes of getting there, Desmond had pizza and cotton candy, both of them. Within like 20, 30 minutes of eating that, he was doubled over on the couch, feeling terrible, crying like crazy. And I was like, take the phone. I was like, record. And then I recorded it. And then afterwards, he was crying, and he's like, I wish I had never eaten that. And we always say, you know, winners don't lose, they learn, you know? And so I'm like, you know, this is a learning experience. You know, the next time you're presented with this, you remember how you feel. And so when you're eating healthy all the time, and you do eat those Halloween candies, you feel like crap, you know? And so that's another thing that maybe every now and then, if they do eat that, maybe it's good for them to be reminded, because they're going to be sensitive to those foods if they don't eat them. Mm-hmm. You know, people that eat like crap all the time are like, I'm fine, until they actually know what fine is, you know? Yeah, right. So I you know, my kids have, both of them have really bad issues with wheat. Like Desmond, it affects his allergies. Dean, it affects his eczema. He'll get eczema, he'll get hyperactivity, and the dyes are terrible for both of them. Mm-hmm. So we know if they're somewhere and the cupcakes are like blue or something, like, you know, it's probably going to be an issue. But at the end of the day, we still think that it's important to, like, you know, let them be in charge and let them be, you know, autonomous.
Yeah, so. What a great parenting tip. You know, so many parents now are just like controlling every decision, you know, not letting any auto-regulation or decision-making, and trying to take it out, and so overprotective, you know?
Yeah, we want to protect them from all the dangers that we see. Like, we want to, don't climb up on that, you know, you're going to get hurt. And it's really awkward when my kids are going up the slide and the parents are telling their kids not to do it, and the kids are like, well, he can do it. And I'm like, well, we don't risk life or limb. That's about it with us. We pick our battles. You know, we're barefoot most of the time. I'm barefoot with them most of the time, because I never know if the opportunity presents itself for me to climb some mountain and I have to have good feet, you know? Yeah. So you never know. Right. And so, like, you know, I think with all of these things, I think it's better to let them do more. And, you know, it's also, it builds trust. So from the minute that, when they were really small, we would say, and we didn't think of these things, we learned these things from other people. We said, you know, if you fall from there, it's gonna hurt. And then sure enough, they would fall and it would hurt. And so now when I say something, he'll say, oh, you know what, you're right, or he'll believe it. And for that reason, if you're trying this approach, I think it's important to find people like you, so that you don't have to worry about feeling like a bad parent in front of another parent because you're not stepping in when you're supposed to. Or for instance, when our kids get together with Ben's kids, a mutual friend of ours, we don't have to worry about, if there's a conflict, we know that they can solve it on their own. We don't have to step in. I think a lot of what happens with the parenting is that people step in all the time. And what ends up happening is the child realizes that they need an authority figure to fix their problem. And then that translates into adulthood, and they they don't know how to fix their own problems. So that's, again, going back to what we said in the beginning, is this whole lifestyle, you know?
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, and it kind of transcends. I mean, so many adults now don't know what to eat. They don't know how
Oh,
to
yeah.
shop. They don't know how to train because they've been in school, listen, be quiet.
Yeah.
This is what you do.
Yep.
You know, my doctor said, you know, so I think having this open mindset is key. Kind of in a few last, because we only got one more minute of carb space on the camera. What book, is there any one book that really kind of helped you change your mindset in terms of parenting and this open mindset?
I think Peaceful Parent, Happy Child is a really good one. And then Free Range Kids. And it's written by America's Worst Mom. That's what she dubbed herself.
Yeah.
Those two. And the author of Peaceful Parent, Happy Kids and Peaceful Parent, Happy Siblings is Laura Markham, Dr. Laura Markham. And if you go to her site, ahaparenting.com, she has an answer for everything. And you realize, well, I want to help my kids, I want to fix this behavior. Then you realize that it's not about the behavior, it's about you connecting with the kids and you getting over your own adult temper tantrums. And it's usually us. We're the ones who have the issues, it's not them. Yeah.
Danny Vega, really appreciate you coming on the show, buddy.
Oh, thanks for coming to my house, man.
Yeah,
it's good to have you here.
And if folks want to connect with you, which I'm sure they will, if they're not already, how should they do so?
So Keto Counterculture on Instagram and Facebook, and fatfuel.family. That's our blog. That's where our podcast is. And we talk about all this stuff because we love this stuff.
That's awesome. And you're pretty active on Instagram, I know for sure. Your stories and everything.
Yeah, very active.
So guys, appreciate guys and gals. Really appreciate you tuning all the way through. Hit that like button if you like this content. I'll be following the comments, and I'm sure Danny will as well. So if you have a comment, please leave a nice one, and we'll catch you on the next video.
Awesome.
Peace.